What if I told you that some of the most brilliant minds behind America's greatest scientific triumphs once wore Nazi uniforms? What if the space race, the Cold War, and even modern intelligence operations were quietly shaped by men who had sworn loyalty to Adolf Hitler? After World War II, the world believed justice had won. The Nazis were defeated, the camps liberated, the war criminals exposed. But behind closed doors, another war had already begun. And in that war, morality became negotiable. This is the story of Project Paperclip, not a conspiracy theory, a documented operation, and a question that still haunts American power to this day. Officially, Project Paperclip was simple. After World War II, the United States recruited German scientists to prevent their knowledge from falling into Soviet hands. It was described as a defensive necessity, a race against communism, a temporary compromise for the greater good. But that explanation only works if you don't look too closely, because many of the men brought to America were not neutral scientists. They were active members of the Nazi Party. Some were involved in forced labor. Some worked at facilities tied directly to concentration camps. And some should never have passed even the most basic background check. Yet their records were altered, their pasts were cleaned, and their crimes quietly ignored. In 1945, Nazi Germany collapsed. American forces entered Europe expecting to dismantle a defeated regime. What they found instead was something far more valuable than territory: knowledge, advanced rocketry, jet propulsion, chemical weapons research, human experimentation data. At the center of it all was one name: Werner von Braun, the architect of the V-2 rocket, a weapon built using slave labor, a weapon that killed thousands, and a weapon that terrified American intelligence. Because whoever controlled this knowledge would control the future. The operation was first called Operation Overcast, later renamed Project Paperclip, after the paperclips used to attach falsified personnel files. That detail matters, because it tells us everything about the mindset behind the program. This was not about justice, it was about utility. The CIA, still in its infancy, worked alongside military intelligence to identify desirable German scientists. And when those scientists failed security checks, the checks were rewritten. Nazi affiliations were downgraded, SS memberships reclassified, war crimes conveniently unverified. By 1955, more than 1,600 German scientists and engineers had been brought to the United States. Not as prisoners, but as assets. Publicly, America held the Nuremberg trials. The world watched as Nazi leaders were prosecuted for crimes against humanity. But behind the curtain, a different standard applied. If you were useful enough, the past became flexible. Some paperclip scientists had overseen forced labor. Others conducted experiments on prisoners without consent. At least one worked directly at facilities connected to concentration camps. Yet they were relocated to suburban America, given government salaries, and protected from prosecution. This wasn't ignorance. Internal memos show officials knew exactly who these men were. The decision was deliberate. As the Cold War escalated, Project Paperclip quietly expanded its influence. These scientists didn't just build rockets. They advised intelligence agencies. They shaped weapons research. They influenced early psychological and medical programs, including projects that would later resemble MKUltra. The logic was always the same. If we don't use them, our enemies will. But there's a problem with that logic. Once you abandon moral boundaries in the name of security, you don't get to decide where the line reappears. For decades, Project Paperclip was barely discussed. When it was mentioned, it was framed as a success story. Moon landings, missile defense, American scientific dominance. But the human cost was rarely acknowledged. The victims of forced labor, the families erased from history, the precedent it set. Because Project Paperclip taught American intelligence a dangerous lesson, that ethics are optional when power is at stake. Project Paperclip didn't end in the 1950s. Its mindset survived. The belief that secrecy protects democracy, that expertise excuses brutality, that the ends justify the means. So the real question isn't whether Project Paperclip happened. It did. The real question is this: how many modern programs were built using the same logic, but with better cover stories? Because when a nation decides that some crimes can be forgiven, it also decides which truths can be buried. If you want more documented stories where power, secrecy, and history collide, subscribe. Because the most important conspiracies are the ones that no longer need to hide.